The storm hit without warning. One moment, the world was quiet, just the usual hum of failing machines and the whisper of wind through broken walls. The next, the sky cracked open like a frozen egg, spilling ice and fury across the dead planet. She had been walking for days, maybe weeks. Time meant nothing when every step might be your last, when every breath burned your lungs like fire. Her bare feet left bloody prints in the snow, but she kept moving. She had to. The small bundle in her arms depended on it. The child hadn't spoken in hours. Her tiny body felt too light to cold, but she was still breathing. That was all that mattered. As long as her daughter drew breath, she would keep walking. Even if her own legs gave out, even if the hunters found them. The wind grew stronger, meaner. It cut through her ceremonial robes like they were made of paper. The fabric, once beautiful and sacred, now hung in frozen tatters. Ice crystals formed on the tears that she refused to let fall. Crying was a luxury she couldn't afford. Not now. She found shelter in the wreckage of an old shuttle pod. Half of it was buried in the snow, but the other half formed a small cave against the storm. She crawled inside, pulling her daughter close to her chest. The metal was cold against her back, but it blocked the worst of the wind. That's when she started to sing. Her voice was broken, cracked from cold and fear, but the melody was pure. It was the same lullaby her own mother had sung to her, generations ago, when their world was still green and warm. Before the wars, before the ice, before everything good had been stripped away. Sleep, my little light, she whispered between verses. Close your eyes just one more time. Dream where there's no cold, no pain. Mama's arms will keep you safe. The child stirred slightly. Her lips moved, forming silent words that might have been mama or might have been nothing at all. It didn't matter. She was still alive, still fighting. The woman sang louder, pushing her voice against the howling wind. If these were to be their last moments, she wanted them filled with love, not fear. She wanted her daughter to remember warmth, not cold. Beauty, not terror. Miles away, through the screaming storm, someone heard her. Jonas Vin had given up on hope 3 winters ago. That's when the last transport ship had left the planet, taking with it everyone smart enough to see the writing on the wall. Everyone except him. He'd stayed behind, telling himself it was duty, telling himself someone needed to maintain the relay station, to keep the emergency beacons running for any lost souls who might still need rescue. Really, he'd stayed because he had nowhere else to go. No family waiting on distant worlds. No fortune to start over. Just guilt, regret, and the slowly dying machines that had become his only companions. The relay station wasn't much to look at, a collection of metal boxes and tubes driven deep into the frozen ground, powered by geothermal vents that still remembered when this planet was alive. It kept him warm enough to survive, fed enough to function, and isolated enough that he couldn't hurt anyone else with his failures. He'd learned to live with the silence. The way sound seemed to die in the thin air. The way the wind could trick you into hearing voices that weren't there. He'd learned not to trust his ears when they told him someone was calling for help. But this was different. Jonas stood in the outer corridor, watching the storm through a window streaked with frost and rust. The glass was so thick with ice that the world outside looked like a dream, white and shapeless and endless. The geothermal heaters rumbled somewhere far below, a comforting vibration he felt more than heard. His coat was a patchwork of insulation. Foam, synthetic leather, and strips cut from old uniforms. It creaked when he moved, like old bones settling. Everything here was old, worn down, held together by determination and desperation. That's when the sound reached him. First, he thought. It was just the wind playing tricks again. The storm had a way of making music from the station's metal bones, groaning melodies that could sound almost human if you weren't careful. He'd fallen for it before, rushing outside to rescue phantoms that existed only in his guilty imagination. But this was clearer, softer, a voice threading through the chaos like a silver wire, a lullaby. Jonas froze. Every muscle in his body went rigid. His breath caught halfway to his lungs, burning in his chest like ice. The sound twisted around him, through him, awakening memories he'd spent years trying to bury. Another voice, another song, another time. When he'd been too late, too slow, too afraid to act. Stay awake, little light, the voice sang, barely audible above the storm. Close your eyes just one more time. Dream where there's no cold, no pain. Mama's arms will keep you safe. His hand moved without conscious thought, fingers wrapping around the reinforced metal bar clipped to his belt. He'd carried it for protection, but it had become more of a worrystone, something to grip when the isolation pressed too hard against his sanity. He forced himself to breathe, forced logic to override instinct. "It's not real," he whispered to the empty corridor. "You're tired, hearing ghosts again. The storm's just playing with the metal, making you think." The wind shifted. The song came again, clearer this time, closer. She was still singing. Jonas didn't remember grabbing his rebreather mask, didn't remember shooting his emergency pack or checking his thermal systems. One moment he was standing frozen in the corridor, and the next he was at the access door, palm pressed against the release mechanism. The door groaned open. Wind howled through the gap like a living thing, clawing at his face and filling his world with the sound of fury. He stepped into it without hesitation. The cold hit him like a physical blow. Even through his protective gear, it found ways to reach him, seeping through tiny gaps, turning his breath to ice before it left his lungs. The snow didn't fall here. It flew, driven horizontal by winds that could strip flesh from bone. Visibility was almost zero. The world had become a white void, broken only by the dark shapes of ruins that loomed out of the storm like sleeping giants. Collapsed relay towers, shattered domes, solar collectors picked clean by decades of scavenging storms. But Jonas knew these paths. He'd walked them 1,000 times, memorizing every obstacle, every safe route, every landmark that might save his life if the storms ever cut his vision completely. He moved by instinct, boots finding purchase on ice-slicked ground, body angled against the wind. He turned toward the old communications array, then angled south where faint wisps of geothermal mist rose from heat seams in the ground. The song had come from there. It had to have. He moved as fast as the conditions allowed. If there was someone alive out here, they wouldn't be for long. The storm was too fierce, the cold too savage. Every second mattered. The wind scraped across his faceplate like claws. It found every gap in his armor, every weakness in his defenses. But worse than the physical assault was the way it seemed to carry echoes, fragments of voices, hints of music, whispers of the past that he couldn't quite escape. Then something interrupted the endless white. Jonas slowed, dropped into a crouch behind a fractured piece of bulkhead. He adjusted his optics, squinting through the storm at a dark shape huddled against the ruins of a shuttle pod. His heart stopped. There, curled in the meager shelter of twisted metal, was a woman. She was tall, thin, her skin a pale blue that definitely wasn't human. She glowed faintly, not with external light, but with something internal. Bioluminescence maybe, dulled by exposure and exhaustion. Her hair was white as the snow around her, tangled into long strands that whipped in the wind like frozen rope. She wore what had once been ceremonial robes, beautiful, flowing fabric, now torn and stiff with blood and ice. Her feet were bare, her arms exposed to the killing cold, and in those arms, wrapped tight against her chest, was a child. The little girl had the same blue skin, the same white hair. She was buried deep in the folds of her mother's robe, so still that Jonas's first thought was that he was too late again. But the woman's lips were moving, softly, desperately, still singing. Jonas took a step forward, then stopped cold. A faint red light was blinking in the snow beside them. His eyes tracked down to find a broken tracking device, half buried and sparking weakly. It had been crushed, probably under a boot heel, but it was still trying to send its signal home. They were being hunted. Jonas took another step. The woman didn't look at him, didn't seem to notice his approach. She just kept singing, her voice barely a whisper above the wind, her fingers stiff with cold as they clutched her daughter. "Don't take her," she said suddenly, her eyes half closed. "Please, let her sleep. Let her dream one last time." The words hit Jonas like a punch to the gut. Memory crashed into him without warning. Another snowfield, another woman with blue skin, another mother trying to protect her child. A different time, a different outpost, but the same desperate scene. Only that time, he'd been wearing a different uniform. That time, he'd been the one hunting. He blinked hard, forcing the thought away. The past was the past. The cold wasn't going to wait for him to drown in old guilt. "Hey," he said, stepping closer. His voice was rougher than he'd intended, scraped, raw by the wind and his own emotions. "You need to get up." She's still breathing, but not for long. The woman's arms tightened around the child. Her mouth opened, then closed, as if she wanted to speak but couldn't find the words. Jonas saw it, then a small, fresh scar across her collarbone. Not a surgical mark, a brand. Someone had marked her like property. He crouched down, lowering his voice to something gentler. I'm not here to hurt you. I'm not here to take her, but I can't help her out here. You both need heat, shelter, food. Still nothing. Then the child twitched slightly. A soft exhale slipped from her lips, and a sound emerged, fragile, hoarse, but unmistakably a word. Mama? A pause. Then, barely louder than the wind. Is this the dream? Or the stars? Jonas didn't wait for permission. He pulled off his thermal wrap and activated the emergency heat gel built into its lining. The fabric began to warm immediately, and he slung it across both of them in one fluid motion. Then he slipped his arms under the girl's light body, bracing for the mother's panic. It didn't come. She flinched, but she didn't stop him. I'll carry her, he said. Can you walk? The woman hesitated. Then she nodded once, slowly. She rose shakily, one bare foot cracking as ice tore away from where it had frozen to the ground. She leaned forward as if her bones remembered chains, as if standing straight was a luxury she'd forgotten how to afford. Together, they moved through the storm. Jonas walked ahead, his body breaking the worst of the wind. He kept the child tucked beneath his coat, her body too cold to still, but alive. Alive was enough. It had to be enough. The journey back to the relay station felt like hours, though it couldn't have been more than minutes. Every step was a battle against the wind, against the ice, against the voice in his head that whispered he was too late, just like before. But they made it. Jonas slammed the station door shut behind them, and the storm's howling cut off like someone had thrown a switch. Inside, the recycled air felt thick and warm after the thin atmosphere outside. Emergency bulbs cast orange and blue shadows against frost-covered walls, and the familiar hum of machinery wrapped around them like a lullaby. He led the woman past stacks of old cargo crates and down into the sunken core where the main heater chugged quietly. Two thin sleeping mats were laid out beside it, his entire furniture collection. Jonas placed the child gently on one of the mats. The woman knelt beside her immediately, her trembling fingers adjusting the thermal wrap with practiced care. He rummaged through his emergency kit, pulling out a nutrient pouch, a hydration tube, and his cleanest cloth. He offered them without words, not wanting to push, not wanting to seem threatening. She didn't move at first, just stared at the supplies like they might be a trap. Eat, he said softly. Drink, then sleep. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the heater's steady rhythm and the child's shallow breathing. Finally, slowly, the woman's hand rose and took the pouch. Jonas sat back against the far wall, watching her watch the child. The little girl was smaller up close, too thin for her age, whatever that might be. Her cheeks were hollow, her limbs trembling even in sleep. But around her neck, she wore something beautiful, a thin necklace of braided silver thread with a soft blue crystal at its center. The stone pulsed with gentle light, no bigger than a fingernail but bright as a small star. He'd seen something like it once before, on a different world. It had marked bloodline, royalty. The woman noticed him, staring. Instead of covering the necklace protectively, she asked a question that cut through the warm air like a blade. Why did you help us? Jonas didn't answer right away. He looked at her, really looked, trying to see past the frostbitten skin and tattered robes and exhausted eyes. Just her, a mother, a woman who had crawled through hell for a child who was still breathing. When his voice came, it was quiet, hollow, not from shame, but from something older and deeper. Because I once let someone like you die, he said. This time, I won't look away. The heater hummed in the silence that followed. She didn't answer, but she pulled the child closer, not protectively, but gently. Her shoulders eased just slightly. Her eyes drifted shut. Jonas stood, turned off the overhead light, and walked to the far side of the station. He didn't sleep. He just watched the dark, listened to the girls breathing, and wondered who they were. Who had branded the woman like an animal? Who had been hunting them through the storm? And what would happen when morning came? Outside, the snow continued to fall like knives. Inside, for the first time in 3 years, Jonas Vin wasn't alone, and that scared him more than the cold ever had. The heater clicked again. This time, Jonas listened to it for what felt like hours. For so long, he'd sat in silence, hearing everything, but registering nothing, just the sound of his own breath and the weight of his own choices pressing down like atmospheric pressure. Now that dull mechanical click broke through the haze. It reminded him that the systems were still holding, that the shelter was still warm, that they were all still alive. Across from him, the woman slept in a shallow sprawl, her body curved protectively around the child. Her long white hair, tangled and stiff with ice, framed a face that had known too much cold and not enough kindness. The girl lay motionless against her chest, swaddled in both thermal wrap and her mother's torn ceremonial robe. The only movement came from the faint rise and fall of their breathing. That, and the slow pulse of the girl's necklace, the blue stone dim but steady, catching the flicker of emergency lighting like it remembered distant stars. Jonas watched them breathe. He didn't know their names, didn't know what planet they'd come from, what they were running from, or why a child like that would wear a pendant reserved for bloodline royalty on some fringe colonies. What he did know was simple. They hadn't died in the snow, not because of him this time. For now, that was enough. The heater clicked again. In the growing warmth, the silence felt less like emptiness and more like peace. After was louder than before. Jonas stood and crossed to the secondary storage rack. He moved carefully. Mechanical practice years alone had turned motion into ritual. No wasted steps, no loud sounds. He pulled a sealed ration pack from the rear shelf, tore it open and dropped the meal cube into the warming bowl. The unit beeped once, then began its low hum, slowly restoring the contents to something edible. Behind him a small voice whispered, "Are we still hiding?" He turned. The child had stirred. Her violet eyes peeked out from under the wrap, wide and glassy, blinking slow as if unsure whether she'd woken from sleep or memory. Jonas said nothing at first. She shifted closer to her mother, who hadn't woken. Then after a beat she whispered again, "If we hide too long, do we forget how to play?" Her voice was thin, scratchy, but her words cut deeper than he expected. He approached slowly, crouching a few feet away. "You're safe here," he said. The girl watched him closely. "I like your coat," she said after a pause. "It smells like smoke and soap." He glanced down at his patched-up thermal layers. "That's a new combination." The warming unit beeped again. Jonas rose, retrieved the bowl, and returned to the pair he set up beside the girl. She sniffed it, her nose wrinkled. "This is food." He didn't smile, but his mouth twitched. Technically, she hesitated, then reached for it. Her hand trembled. She tried to eat quickly, and choked on the first bite. Jonas moved on instinct. He crouched and lightly on her back, steadying her. "Slow down," he said gently. "It's not going anywhere." The girl coughed once, then managed a second bite, slower this time. Chewed, swallowed. Something flickered in her expression. Warmth. She didn't thank him. She didn't need to. Her mother stirred. The woman's eyes opened slowly, glassy with sleep. Her gaze darted to her daughter, then to Jonas, her body tense, not quite alarmed but not at ease either. Jonas stepped back. "She's eating," he said. "She's okay." The woman didn't speak but touched the girl's shoulder, grounding her. The girl looked up. "Mama," she said softly, "he gave me warm mush. I think it's a little bit alive." Jonas gave her a deadpan look. "It better not be." The woman's expression didn't change, but her fingers curled more gently into her daughter's hair. Jonas knelt again. "Do you have a name?" he asked the girl. She blinked. "I'm not supposed to tell strangers." He nodded. "Fair enough." A long silence settled again. Then, without warning, the girl tilted her head. "Are you a robot?" Jonas blinked. "What?" "Like the ones in stories," she said. "That look real." "Buterant. Mama said some people are made of metal on the inside. Not hearts, just wires." He stared at her, unsure what to say. "You don't smile," she added. "You move like someone told you how. But you forgot whoa. That one hit a little too close, no?" he said. "Finally, I'm not a robot," Osha said. "Okay." She paused. "Can I call you Mr. Not Robot?" He gave a small shrug. "I've been called worse." That earned a tiny laugh, a quiet one, but it was the first law he'd heard in years that didn't come from a recording. He turned to the woman again. "You don't have to trust Mebut. You're not going to make it outside. Whatever chased you, whatever left that tracker next to your body, it might still be looking." Her gaze flicked toward the corner where the broken beacon still sat, its light long extinguished. "I crushed it," she said. Her voice was low, musical but tired. "I thought it stopped. Maybe I was wrong." Jonas nodded. "Maybe." She looked down at her daughter. She wasn't supposed to be born. That stopped him cold. He waited. Let her say the next part when she was ready. They called her an error, a blood breach. Said she wouldn't live past first sleep. "And you ran?" Her eyes met his, then dark, stormlit eyes that had seen too many locked doors. "I walked," she said quietly. "We had no ship, no map, just silence." Jonas didn't know what to say to that, so he said nothing. Instead, he walked to the far shelf, rummaged through the old medkit, and pulled out a set of heated gloves and socks. He tossed them onto the map beside her. She didn't touch them at first, but her daughter did, curious, fascinated. Then Jonas did something he hadn't done in years. Turned away, opened his emergency locker, and pulled out a backup thermal blanket. Last one. He brought it to them, wrapped it around both mother and child. The woman stared at him. Why do this? Met her gaze. I already told you, he said. I failed someone once. Someone who ransomed me on with a child. She looked down. Her hand found her daughter's. The girl yawned, curled tighter beneath the blanket. Then just before her eyes fluttered, classed, she whispered, Mama, this place smells like a person. What do you mean? Her mother asked softly. The girl smiled. Like someone lives here? Not just machines. Jonas turned away and pretended not to hear the sound that cracked softly in the woman's throat. Later, long after they were asleep, Jonas sat alone near the wall. The emergency light pulsed over worn steel and rusted rivets. The child stirred once in her sleep, murmuring a word in a language he didn't know. The mother's hand never left her back, and Jonas, for the first time in a long time, didn't feel like he was hiding. Not completely, but he still didn't dare hope. Not yet. Jonas woke to the sound of soft breathing and the faint rhythmic scrape of something being dragged across frost. For a moment, the familiarity of the shelter's stale air and the distant hum of geothermal pumps lulled him into believing he was alone again. But the last 2 days have been nothing more than memory echoing through his solitude. Then he heard the whisper of movement, deliberate, careful, a soft shuffle, not off boots or claws, but of bare feet sliding across smooth steel. He opened his eyes. The girl was awake, crouched beside one of the frosted panels near the heater, a small piece of burnt coal clutched in her hand. Her fingers blackened with soot was drawing. He sat up slowly, careful not to startle her. His back cracked under the motion, a quiet reminder that the floor hadn't gotten any softer in the night. She didn't turn. Her arm moved with focused precision, short strokes across the white sheet of frost. When she paused, it was only to tilt her head and study the wall as if expecting it to talk back. Jonas rose, stepped over, and crouched beside her. The drawing wasn't detailed, just thick figures etched in uneven lines, 3 of them, one tall and wide-shouldered, one tall and narrow, Andoni small in the middle, with curls drawn as loops around a round head. They were holding hands, a crooked rectangle above them labeled in shakily drawn glyphs. Home. Next to it, she'd drawn what looked like a rocket, if rockets had smiles, and beneath that, an unidentifiable blob with a face. Jonas raised an eyebrow. You drew a potato? She grinned without looking at him. It's not a potato. It's a space poop. He said, dead pan. Well, that's worse. It's happy. Of course it is. She glanced at him sidelong, gauging his expression. Do you like it? He hesitated, then nodded. I do, except maybe the poop, she snorted, and got back to work. From behind them, a soft voice broke the quiet. Larry. The girl turned immediately. Shireen sat upright now, back against the wall, one hand pressed over her ribs. Her hair was a white curtain falling across her shoulder, but her eyes were clear, focused. She looked at the drawing, then at Jonas. Her expression remained unreadable. I let her draw, he said simply. Shireen looked down at her hands. You let her, but that wasn't just a statement. It was something else, a measure, a test. Jonas stood and walked to the heating unit. He adjusted the power output, then opened the small cabinet beside it. A ration bar, sifted overnight by proximity to the vents, waited inside. He brought it to them. Shireen didn't reach for it. She kept her eyes on him. You don't ask questions. You'd lie. Her lips twitched, almost a smile. Almost. Is that what you did before? She asked. Asked questions and got lies. Jonas sat across from them, back to the wall. No, used to give people names. They didn't earn, then sent them running into storms worse than this one. Is that what you think I did? She asked quietly. I think you earned your name and you kept running anyway. Shireen went quiet. Leary began humming, ash-colored in the eyes of the stick figures. The sound was soft, tuneless, but not sad. She's changed since the snow, Shireen said after a moment. She smiles again. You did that. Jonas shook his head. She's just somewhere. She's not being hunted, and yet you keep expecting me to run, Shireen murmured. Because you haven't unpacked, he said, gesturing subtly to the pack she hadn't touched since arriving. Shireen leaned forward. And you, when did you unpack? His reply was a long silence, then with the faintest bitterness. I never did. I buried everything in crates, even the parts of me that still worked. Leary had finished her drawing. She stepped back, examined it, then gently blew warm breath over the frost it smeared, distorted the figure's chevron, then turned to Jonas. Do you have shiny things? What kind of shiny batteries? She said seriously. I'm building a robot. Jonas raised a brow. That explains the power of failures. She opened the pouch on her belt and pulled out a tangled mess of wires and an old comm chip wrapped in foil. This is Zap. He needs snackies. He reached forward, retrieved a small flashlight from his jacket pocket and opened the battery compartment. Only two, he warned, handing them to her. And if you short-circuit my heater, you're sleeping outside. I'll make him polite, she promised. Jonas watched Ash retreated to the far end of the room. Kneeling behind Crate, the soft clicks of assembly echoed behind her like the beginning of a lullaby made from plastic and broken things. He turned back to Shirian. Was she born there? He asked. Shirian hesitated, then nodded. They made us believe we were vessels, that children like her, like me, should never exist. Purity was their word, perfection. I was marked when they discovered I'd been hiding a second gene pattern. I thought they'd terminate me, but they didn't. Nuthy said she was a glitch in the batch, an anomaly, but she breathed. And when it held her, she opened her eyes. Jonas said nothing. I don't remember the escape, Shirian said softly. Only snow and silence. And her fingers tightening around mine. Jonas thought of the old comm relay tower, the one where he'd last seen another mother's fingers lose their grip. I gave someone your name, he said, a long time ago. Not yours exactly, but close enough. A forged profile, false bloodlines. They didn't make it through processing. Sharon's gaze didn't waver. She didn't look angry, just tired. You've been carrying ghosts, she said. Jonas gave a small nod. I keep thinking if I bury them deep enough, they'll stop knocking. And do they know? The silence between them was intense. It was heavy, not with suspicion, but with something beginning to shift, the first edge of understanding, not forgiveness. That wasn't the shape of it. Shirian leaned forward slightly, fingers brushing the corner of the thermal blanket. She asked if she could call you ours last night, she said. Jonas's breath caught. What did you say? He asked, voice quiet. I said it was turquoise. He looked at the girl still working on her robot in the corner, her fingers smudged with soot and wire grease. Then he looked at Shirian, and for the first time, the silence didn't feel like punishment. It felt like space being made. Something changed. Then, quietly, invisibly but undeniably, Leary looked up and grinned. Mr. Jonas? Yeah, you look like a jungle prince now. He blinked. Excuse me? She pointed. He glanced down. His utility jacket was covered in scavenged wires, beads, and what looked like moss. I fixed your coat, she said proudly. You looked boring before. Shirian stifled a laugh. Behind her hand, Jonas just stared at her. You're welcome, Leary added sweetly. And for the first time in a very long time, Jonas Vaughn laughed. Aerial sound, not bitter, not hollow, just human, just alive. And for the first time, Shirian didn't flinch at the sound. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes. She didn't fall asleep, but she didn't need to stay alert either, not for now. The light in the shelter had shone not in brightness, but in quality, warmer, steadier, as if the structure itself had decided they were no longer temporary, that they belonged here, that they'd stayed long enough to be trusted. Jonas moved quietly through the main room, adjusting the solar collector to absorb what little filtered light made it through the storm-smeared dome. The wind outside was gentler today, rolling low across the horizon like a tired animal settling down after a long chase behind him. Sharon stirred. She had been asleep, really asleep, for the first time since Sethi arrived. Her breathing had been deep, rhythmic, like something long denied, wistfully allowed. But now she was sitting up against the side wall, Leary curled beside her like a blanket folded in. Half the child's curls were tangled, her fingers still wrapped around the leg of her sock puppet creation, Captain Sockwo's mismatched button eyes stared into nothing. Shirian's voice was quiet. You're a forger, that's what you said. Jonas didn't look up. He adjusted the collector again. I was. You gave people new names, hinted sometimes, new faces, new bloodlines, entire histories, whatever they paid for. Did you give one to yourself? That gave him pause, his hand still on the panel. No, he said. I didn't want a new name, I just wanted the old one forgotten. She watched him for a long moment. Then did you have family, a partner? He finally turned to face her. Once a sister, she died young. After that there was no one else. I kept it that way, safer. Shirian didn't push further. She didn't need to. Instead, she reached for the small robe she'd unfolded earlier, a ceremonial garment worn and patched with uneven thread. She laid it across her lap with deliberate reverence. Jonas stepped closer, crouching near the edge of her bidding. What is that? He asked softly. My original garb, she said. From before I was reassigned, we were called memory bursers, a caste trained to remember the names that mattered, the ones that weren't allowed to be written down. She traced one of the silver stitch patterns with a fingertip. They took us first. Said stories made us fragile. Said remembrance was a defect. They didn't kill us though. They changed us, reconditioned. Jonas leaned forward, elbows on knees. That's when they put you in the reproduction facilities. Sharon nodded, not flinching at the bluntness. They called it optimization. I was healthy, my gene profile stable. I had a bloodline clean enough to justify selective pairing. Jonas hesitated. Thenlo, was there someone else before? A long pause, then she shook her head. There was a pairing, a sign, not a person, a donor code. I never saw his face, never heard his voice. He was a file entry and a directive, nothing more. Jonas's mouth tightened, but he said nothing. If he's still alive, she added, he doesn't. Nullary exists, and if he died, he never knew what they used him for. Either way, he isn't part of us. Jonas met her eyes. There was no bitterness in her tone, no sorrow, just truth. I never wanted to carry a child, she continued. Not like that, not by mandate. So when I felt her move, when I knew she was alive inside me, growing anyway, I didn't rejoice. She stared at their own hands. I panicked. I counted days. I made plans. I wondered how long I could hide her heartbeat from scans. Jonas didn't breathe. Then one night she kicked just once, and I felt something I didn't recognize. Not fear, not duty, something glee. She looked down at Leary. I sang that night, broke silence, broke protocol, and named her before I ever escaped, before I ran. Jonas reached out gently, adjusting a fold in the child's blanket. She doesn't talk about her past. She doesn't remember the cold place. Not truly. Just shadows, that's all she should keep. He nodded, then Sharon surprised him again. She wants more, she said. Jonas looked up. She draws others in her pictures, not just us. Sometimes another small shape, so many mesto, not detailed, but imagine. Jonas exhaled slowly. You think she's lonely, I think she's content, but contentment isn't the same as joy. They sat in silence for a long while, then she added, almost whispering, I don't know if I could ever choose to do that again, carry another life even freely. You don't have to, Jonas said gently. No one should ever ask that of you again. She looked at him, and her voice softened. But if I wanted to one day, would you still stay? Jonas met her gaze without hesitation. I'd stay even if you didn't, he said, and that answer settled into the room like warmth, like moss taking ruin stone. Shirian reached for her robe again and, for the first time, began stitching a new symbol into the hem. A design that wasn't part of any cast or memory line, just a shape, simple, rounded, intertwined threads. Something new, something chosen. Leary stirred, then sitting up and blinking in the light. Is it tomorrow yet? She asked, sure, and smiled almost. Leary crawled into Jonas's lap without asking, dropping Captain Sakano the floor with a dramatic sigh. Today was too quiet, she grumbled. Too quiet? Jonas asked, raising an eyebrow. No explosions, no running, not even one monster. Jonas leaned back, arms around her small form. Sounds like a good day to me. Leary squinted at him. You're weird, he nodded solemnly. Thank you. Shirian watched them, and for the first time, the warmth in her chest wasn't just survival. It was belonging. It was the feeling of something once broken beginning to grow back whole. And for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like someone else's story. She felt like her own. It began with the ground humming, not a noisy exactly, more like a sensation felt through the soles of their feet, a subtle tremor that ran up the spine, barely perceptible but undeniable. Once noticed. Jonas paused mid-step, a coil of wire in one hand and a soldering tool in the other, staring at the floor like it had just whispered to him. Shirian noticed it too. She looked up from where she was, threading old filament through the remains of a lamp casing, eyes narrowing. Do you feel that? Yeah, Jonas said. He set the tool down. It's not mechanical. From the other side of the room, Leary sat cross-legged. Beside her mostly dismembered robot, Zap now sported a bottle cap for a head and battery leads for arms. She looked up, her bioluminescent freckles dimming a little. That happened when she got nervous. Did I break the floor? She asked, wide-eyed. No, Jonas said. This is bigger. He crossed the console, fingers flying over old touchscreen panels. He pulled up seismic feedback from the geothermal intake system buried deep beneath the relay station. What had once been a stable thermal sink was now glowing red on the diagnostic, pulsing unevenly, out of rhythm, not overheating, not a mechanical failure. Movement from bellow. Gene is cursed under his breath. Shirian stepped closer. What is it? A shift? Hazard, tectonic or pressure-related. The ice shelf under this region has vents from. When they tried to terraform Weatherin, the system failed before they could stabilize the core fractures. Most of the planet's crust is held together by temperature. If something cracks, Leary stood holding Zap like a shield. Is it going to explode? Jonas didn't want to answer. Another tremor rolled through Theffler, this one louder. The wall lights flickered. Shirian took Leary's hand, immediately pulling her gently toward the reinforced shelter corridor. Jonas followed, sweeping tools into his satchel and slinging it over his shoulder. Do Warren? Shirian asked. He hesitated. No, not yet. I need to see what we're dealing with. He opened the hatch leading to the upper observatory tunnel, an old crawl space of frost-coated polyglass that led above the station's dome. Once used to monitor long-range antennas, it now served no purpose except height. The wind had picked up outside, and the faint sickly glow of the geothermal steam vents lit the edges of the horizon in uneven pulses. Jonas climbed a ladder, boots clanking, breath fogging inside his visor as he opened the exterioroscope patch. Then he saw it to the east. Past the collapsed satellite relay and buried drone mount, the ice was moving, not melting, heaving like something underneath it was breathing. The landscape rippled, cracked, and sank. An entire field of hardened frost vanished as if swallowed from below, replaced by jagged fractures that pulsed with dull orange light. The crust wasn't shifting. It was failing. Jonas dropped back down into the tunnel and sealed the hatch. We need to pack essentials, he said the moment his feet hit the floor. Now, Shirian didn't question him. She didn't panic either, just scooped Leary into her arms and began moving. Leary clung to her mother, burying her face in her neck. Is the floor angry? She whispered. Shirian kissed her temple. Nah, little star. It's just remembering how to move. They worked quickly. Rations, thermal packs, medical kit. Jonas overrode the access to the emergency crawler buried in the Sabay, half functional, but capable of holding 3 bodies and serving outside pressure for a limited time. The shelter groaned. A deep rumbling sound rippled through the walls. Jonas moved faster. They were nearly ready when the first real quake hit. Not a tremor, an impact. The floor buckled, tossing Leary from Sharon's arms and knocking Jonas against the wall. Sparks flew from Thiesling as the heater's power conduit split and overloaded, plunging the room into half-darkness. Jonas scrambled toward the child, dragging her under the steel reinforcement of the central console and crawled beside them seconds later, wrapping her arms around them both as another shockwave rolled beneath the station above. Through the cracks in the ceiling vents they could hear it ice breaking, massive grinding. Plates of it collapsing and reforming in motion like the entire planet was exhaling after a long frozen breath. Leary shook silently in Shirian's arms, eyes wide with terror. Jonas put his hand on her head, holding her steady against his chest. It's going to pass, he said, though he wasn't sure if it was true. Shirian leaned her forehead against his shoulder, her breathing ragged. Is it a core fracture? I think so, Jonas said. The crust might collapse entirely in this quadrant, and the geothermal vents. She asked, if they go with it, will Loseth heat sinks? It'll be like living on an airless moon. Sharon nodded slowly. Then we run. Jonas didn't want to. He didn't want to leave the shelter he'd built, the place that had become a something more than walls and wires. He looked at the frost-covered control panels, the makeshift heater, the child's doodles still glowing faintly on the walls. But the truth was undeniable. This place was dying. Crawlers ready? He said. Pack light, 1 bag each. Shirian met his gaze. Where will we go? Jonas looked down at Leary, whose small hands were still gripping his jacket tightly, her eyes reflecting the emergency lights like twin stars. West, he said. There's a moss valley along the geothermal rift line. If it's still stable, we can survive there until the thaw. Shirian nodded. On sea then we leave the ghosts behind. They gathered what they could, moving with the focused precision of people who knew how quickly hope could collapse. As Jonas slung the last bag over his shoulder, Hepaust in the hatchway, he looked back once at the station where he had chosen to disappear, where silence had once been his only companion, where a blue-skinned woman and her luminous child had rewritten his place in the world. Now, Thessalon's was breaking. The earth beneath them roared again. But he didn't flinch this time. He turned, took Shirian's hand and led them into the ice. And the sky, for the first time in years, cracked open with light. The crawler's wheels cut a gentle groove into the frost-carving silence as it rolled westward, away from the fractured basin that had once been their shelter, their hiding place, and for a fleeting moment, their sanctuary. Jonas didn't speak, not because he had nothing to say, but because everything he could say felt smaller than what had happened, smaller than the way the earth had trembled beneath them, swallowing the past whole, smaller than the way Sharon had looked at him afterward, equal parts relief and certainty, like she'd made a decision the moment the sky cracked open and didn't need to justify it. Leary slept again, curled up in a narrow bunk behind them, one foot still peeking out from beneath the thermal blanket, freckles pulsing faintly with residual light. She was exhausted, not from fear anymore, but from the sheer effort of feeling safe. Sharon sat beside Jonas in the front seat, angled slightly toward the viewport. She didn't ask where they were going. He hadn't told her. They both knew this wasn't a flight anymore. It was a choice, and choosing was heavier than running. They crested a ridge just as the sun broke through a lattice of high-altitude frost clouds. It wasn't warm, not truly, but for the first time in days, the light didn't feel cruel. Below them stretched a valley that shimmered with steam, geothermal breath rising through cracked stone, feeding clusters of glowing moss and painting the ice with golden veins. Jonas slowed the crawler, letting it glide to a quiet halt. Shirian exhaled softly. You found it? He nodded. Old terraforming maps listed it as a failed thermal pocket. Survey teams gave up after the collapse, but it looks like the vents held. It's warm enough to stay. She didn't smile, not fully, but her eyes held something close to gratitude. They climbed out into the steam-thick air. Jonas felt it immediately. The way his joints stopped aching, the way his breath didn't freeze inside his chest. He cold smelled sulfur, minerals, and moss. He could feel the earth breathing beneath his boots. Shirian stepped forward, testing the stone. Her toes sank slightly into a bed of heated moss, and she knelt, fingers spreading across its surface like she was blessing it. She didn't speak, didn't need to. Jonas moved to the rear of the crawler and gently lifted Leary into his arms. She stirred, blinking up at him with sleep-hazed eyes. Are we still hiding? She mumbled. He shook his head. No, little lantern, not here. Shirian had already begun unpacking, not like a refugee, like Simeon planting roots. They set up the tarp beside a ridge of black rock just high enough to shield against the wind. Jonas staked it down with magnetic clamps while Shur and fashioned a small cooking pit using scavenged heating coils and volcanic stone. They worked in unspoken rhythm, efficient, practiced, and intimate in the quiet way shared survival creates. That night, after they had eaten and the tarp was sealed, Jonas stepped outside alone. The valley shimmered under starlight. Thin veils of steam drifted across the landscape like breath. The geothermal mist caught the moonlight in waves, turning the world silver and gold. He heard movement behind him. Sharon emerged from the tarp and joined him, wrapping a blanket over her shoulders. Her hair was loose, drifting down her back like poured snow. Her face was bare in the moonlight. Tranquil, yes, but shadowed. I used to believe quiet was dangerous, she said. Where I grew up, silence meant someone was listening, watching, waiting. Jonas didn't speak. He just stood beside her and waited. She continued, her voice lower now, but thistleance. It's different. It doesn't feel empty. It feels earned, he said. Queetlish turned to him, her breath curling in the cold. Do you still want to disappear? He met her gaze. No, I think I've been trying to remember who I was before I disappeared. Shirian nodded slowly. And I'm not sure I like that man, Jonas said. But I don't have to be him anymore. The quiet that followed wasn't heavy. It was full, like a heartbeat between words. Then she surprised him. You could have left us after the collapse. No one would have blamed you. He didn't look away. I don't want to leave. She stepped closer. Why not? He answered with something he hadn't said out loud until now. Because you're no a burden, and she's not just a child I rescued. You're both something I want to stay for. Shirian didn't reply right away. She looked down at the ground, at the moss glowing beneath their feet, alive despite the ice, the collapsed thistleance. Then stay, she said softly. He reached out. She let him. His fingers brushed hers, gentle, reverent. She turned her hand over and laced their fingers together. And just like that, something shifted between them. Not a confession, not a promise, a presence. Later, after returning to the tent and checking that Lurie was still asleep, curled under the blankets Zap tucked beside her, Shirian sat cross-legged across from Jonas, near the heater coil. She studied the girl for a moment, then looked back at him. She's doing better. He nodded. She still draws eyes on everything though. That's how she kicks. If things are real, if it has eyes, it has thoughts, feelings. Jonah smiled faintly. She gave me eyes once on my coat, said I looked like a jungle. Princess Sherian tilted her head. You didn't like it? I didn't know how to deserve it, he admitted. But I think I'm learning. Shirin was quiet for a long moment, then voice low. Do you think she's lonely? Jonas looked at her. Why do you ask? She doesn't say it, but I see her watching the skies sometimes, like she's waiting for something she can't name. Not danger. Not a ship, just someone like her. He followed her gaze toward Leary, whose breathing was soft and steady. You're no talking about other refugees. Jonas said. No, she replied. I'm asking if it's selfish to want to give her a sibling. That caught him off guard, not because it was unexpected, but because awful gently she'd said it. He considered the question, then answered honestly. No, he said, not if it comes from love. Shirian looked into the firelight. I don't want to do it because I'm afraid of being alone. I want to do it because for the first time I can choose. Jonas reached across the space and touched her knee. Then when you're ready, we choose together. Her hand covered his. Not just survival this time, she whispered, but something that can grow. He leaned forward, pressed his forehead towards, and let that closeness say everything. They didn't need to. Outside, the steam danced in soft spirals. Insidia family was taking root, not in fear, but in the quiet, steady warmth of something finally beginning. And for the first time, the silence didn't feel like absence, it felt like peace. They reached the valley at dusk when the light wasn't quite golden and the wind had finally stopped trying to claw the sky apart. The crawlers' reserve power hummed low as it coasted over the last ridge, revealing a depression in the ice where geothermal vents bled warmth through cracks in the earth. Thin mists curled upward like smoke from a sleeping giant's mouth. Below them stretched a basin scattered with moss, laced rocks, shallow steam pools, and skeletal remnants of some long-forgotten survey outpost. The metal bones of the structure shimmered with frost, but the moss glowed faintly in the steam's breath, green, gold, and silver. In half-light life where there should have been none. Jonas parked the crawler near a stone rise and powered it down. Silence fell. Shirian stepped out first, barefoot despite the cold, her tall frame moving with quiet, measured grace. She closed her eyes for a moment and let the warmth of the steam rise against her skin. Her white hair stirred in the air, soft and entangled, now falling in clean lines over her shoulders. Leary followed down from the crawler with Zap tucked under her arm. Her cheeks glowed with health again, no fever now, just the soft pulse of her freckles blinking like stars beneath her skin. Jonas stood last, looked over the landscape, not with suspicion but with a kind of guarded awe. Place didn't feel hostile. It didn't feel safe either, but it felt real, alive in a way that Weathering Six rarely allowed. They made camp beneath a stony overhang where the heat from a vent pocket rose gently through the rock. The air was warmer than any shelter they'd known. Jonas sealed the tarp into the stone with magnetic clamps and activated a portable barrier field. It wasn't perfect, but it would keep the frost out and the heat in. They didn't talk much at first. The quiet was its own language now. Leary sat cross-legged, humming to her so fast she arranged rocks into a ring around her latest creation, a crude solar lamp Jonas had built from crawler scrap and a melted lens. She insisted it was the sun, a small one, she clarified, because we're still learning how to be warm. Shirian began drawing lines into the dirt near the steam vent. Elegant curves. Glyphs when? Jonas asked. She explained. The names of the stars my mother gave me. If I don't draw them, I forget them. He crouched beside her and watched her fingers move. You don't speak her name, he said. Shirinian's hand paused. She was taken during the syndicate purge. I never saw what they did to her. I only heard the screams through the ventilation shafts. She didn't flinch. She told it like a fact, but her breath hitched at the end, the only betrayal. Jonas reached over and brushed his fingers against the dirt beside hers, close enough to touch, but not quite. She'd be proud you made it here, he said. Shirian looked at him long and quiet. I didn't come here, you carried us. Jonas shook his head. You survived. I just followed the sound of your song. The silence between them softened later as darkness fell fully. The stars emerged clear and vast. No city lights here, nor vital clutter, just sky, the kind that made you feel small and human and worthy all at once. Leary crawled into Jonas's lap without a word and leaned back against his chest. She didn't ask this time, didn't warn him, just chose him. The gesture hit harder than it should have. You're warm, she said sleepily. You make a good blanket. He replied, I'm not a blanket, she said, yawning. I'm a heater with feelings. Jonas smiled. Shirian lay on her side, propped up by one elbow, watching them. Do you regret it? She asked. He didn't ask what Shamit. No, he said, I thought I came to this planet to disappear. Turns out, I came to remember. She nodded once. And will you keep running now that you remember? Jonas gently adjusted the thermal blanket over Lur's legs. No, this time I stay. We build something not for hiding but for living. Sharon's expression shifted. Something deep softened in her, not a smile. Not exactly, but something fuller, lighter. She raked into the satchel at her side and pulled out 3 folded cloths stitched together from scavenged fabric, padded and worn. Each bore a symbol. One was hers, the moonlight curve of her line. One was Lee's, drawn by hand with star marks and circles. The third was new. It bore no crest, no mark of bloodline or caste, just a name. Vaughn. She handed it to Jonas without a word. His fingers closed around it slowly. It wasn't a gesture of thanks, it was belonging. He nodded once. Then he stood and walked to the edge of the ridge. The wind had calmed. The world no longer screamed with fracture. Beneath the mist, mosses glowed softly, like cucumbers waiting for hands to tend them. In that moment, he didn't feel like a criminal or a fugitive or a ghost. He felt human. He felt chosen. The girl had said it before. Now he believed it. He was theirs, and they were his. The sky above them cracked wide and cold. But here, in this basin of warmth and memory and new names, they were no longer surviving the world. They were part of it together. The days had settled into a rhythm. Steam curled gently through the mossy basin at dawn, leaving the air thick with warmth and light. Jonas had built a small solar kiln from salvaged lenses and reflector plates. Shirian had carved a shelf and toast stone wall with a heated blade lining it with preserved roots, powdered herbs, and seed packets salvaged from Neckerler's emergency stores. Leary, however, was bored, not sad, not restless. In the dangerous way she once was, just understimulated. She had organized every stone shape, built 4 lopsided moss forts for Zap the robot, attempted to teach a beetle how to sit, and most recently painted the inside of her blanket with berry juice because she decided it was emotionally dull. When she fell asleep that night face down on her mother's lap, arms wrapped around Zap's latest paper-glued friend, Shirin gently shifted her weight and stood. Jonas looked up from the power cell he was rebuilding. She wore herself out, he said, a smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. She misses noise, Shirian replied, softlishes, not used to the world being this still, this safe. Jonas nodded. I think she liked the danger. I think she liked being the reason we had a run together. Shirian stepped outside the tarp and onto the stone path. Jonas followed without a word, falling in a stride beside her. The mist was thin tonight, the stars clearer than ever. They walked in silence for a long while. Then she spoke. Did you ever want more children? The question caught him off guard, not in a bad way, just enough to steal his breath for a moment. He looked sideways at her, studying her expression, not testing, not teasing, just honest curiosity. I never had the chinchetto. Think about it, he said. When I was running ops, everything was short-term, no attachments. I wasn't supposed to care where people ended up, and after he trailed off, after meant everything. After woman he couldn't save, after disappearing, after guilt had become muscle memory. Shirian nodded. I used to think my blood wasn't something I wanted to pass on, she said quietly, not after what they did, what they made me part of. Jonas didn't answer, he just waited. But Leary isn't a scar, she went on. She's the space between pain, the breath between shouts. She makes me want to plant something, grow something, even if it's small. They sat on the edge of a flat, sun-warmed stone. Shirian pulled her niece up, arms wrapped loosely around them. Her long hair drifted across her bare shoulders like silk drawn by the wind. Jonas studied her face. How different she looked now from the woman who had once sung a last lullaby in the snow. There was still shadow in her gaze, but now it was shadow softened by light. He looked back toward the tent with a faint pulse. Off Lur's freckles still glimmered against the fabric. She'd be a good sister, he said. Shirian's lips curved. Not quite a smile, but close. She would, she agreed. She already talks to Zap, likes real. Technically that qualifies. A soft laugh escaped her. Low, rich privity stirred something old in him, something quiet and warm that had once been drowned in guilt, but was learning to breathe again. After a moment he asked, is that something you want? She turned toward him fully, not coy, not distant, just vulnerable. I think I want to choose, she said, this time choose who, choose why, choose when, not be told, not be used. Jonas nodded slowly. I don't want to give her a sibling just because she's lonely. Shirian added, I won't toto it because we've built something worth adding to. Jonas looked at her and his voice dropped lower, more intimate. I think we have silence bloomed between them, thick and gentle like fog wrapping around a tree. Shirian's fingers brushed Hedis, not by accident. Jonas turned his hand, laced his fingers with hers and brought the back of her hand to his lips. He didn't kiss it with heat, he kissed it like a vow, a promise carved in breath and bone. Shirian leaned into him, head resting on his shoulder, hand still in his. If, she whispered, when it happens, I want to be here in this warmth, not in flight, not in fear. It will be, he said. He pressed a kiss to her temple and held her there under stars that didn't blink and earth that had finally stopped shaking beneath their feet. They didn't speak again. That night, they didn't need to, because they weren't planning an escape anymore. They were planting a future, a family, a life chosen, not given. And for the first time in all the frozen years behind them, that was enough.